welcome to another episode of CMC Conversations. I'm Alexander Brandt. In this episode, we have a conversation with Debbie Klassen. A lot of you might know her as the one who was editing the Chronicle for many years. Recently, she's been studying 1 Timothy. I think that 1 Timothy has a lot of practical instruction for us as churches, especially as we have come back from the pandemic. Now, I want to be clear. Even though this podcast is called CMC Conversations, I and Debbie are both just two individuals, and the opinions and thoughts that we share in this episode are that. They are the thoughts and opinions of two individuals, and not necessarily the opinions of the conference. With that being said, I hope you enjoy this episode. Well, thank you for being here with me. I just want to get to know who you are, and so I'll ask a few questions to start about who you are and what you do in the conference, or and some of the things that you have done in the conference.
Okay. Yeah, I haven't been really involved as much in the last couple of years, mainly because I got married about 4 years ago, and things have just kind of changed a little bit. But so people might remember me more as Debbie Funk, which was my name before I got married. I worked in the conference office for 20 years, from 1987 to 2007, basically kind of just running the office in that. But, it was a good experience in that I got quite involved with helping with stuff like missions conferences, that we had more at that time, youth conferences, retreats, and then later on, I think it was around 2000 or 2001, I started working with the Chronicle, the CMC Chronicle, being editor with that. And so that's been my main, thing. I've been involved quite a bit in the Steinbach CMC as youth leader, Sunday school teacher. I think I did it for a little while. I've been involved in children's clubs and a little bit in ladies ministry. So those are some of the things that I've done, that I can recall right at this moment.
Wow, that's quite the list. You went through it quick, but there's a lot of work that you've done for the past 20 years, or 20 years plus, I suppose.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's pretty impressive. So you're a part of the Steinbach CMC?
That's right, yes.
Okay. And have you always attended Steinbach CMC, or is there a journey that brought you to the Steinbach Church?
Yeah, there would be a journey. My background is actually from the Grace Church in Steinbach, the Grace Mennonite Church. That's my mom's family's church, so that's where my parents were baptized and belonged to. I attended there off and on. My parents weren't very regularly till maybe about 12, when a neighbor kind of introduced me to the Rosengard CMC. So my sister and I went there for a while. That's where I was baptized. Also, I've helped out a little bit in the Mitchell CMC as well. And then after I graduated from Bible College, which was Providence College at that time, it was Winnipeg Bible College, I discovered this opening for a secretary in the new conference office, which was located in Steinbach. I'd moved to Steinbach, and so I just thought that would be more convenient to, begin to attend to the Steinbach CMC. And so I've been involved there since then. So that would probably be around 1987 or so when I started at the Steinbach CMC.
Okay. So Rosengard, that's also where Dave went, right?
That's right. That's correct. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I remember him too when we were younger.
Okay. So you said you went to Prov. What degree were you pursuing there?
At that time, I took it was a Bachelor of Arts course in Biblical Studies. So basically, just going through the Bible and stuff, I found it was a good experience that, because I didn't really have a lot of church background growing up, it was a good way to really get established a little bit more into the Bible and understand it better.
It'd be very similar to an SBC experience, I imagine.
Probably, yeah, I would think so. Mm-hmm.
I know that, especially the first 2 or 3 years of being in school, it's just eye-opening to to realize how to study some of those things and how to ask the right questions, or how to at least put yourself in the right direction to find. It seems like you never find all the answers, or you even find the answer, but you find pieces, and things kind of come together.
Yeah, one of the reasons why I left the conference in 2007, or like my work there, is to pursue further education. And I have a graduate degree with a Master of Arts in theological studies, kind of with a history basis. And I feel even after all of that education, I still don't have nearly all of the answers. In fact, I sometimes wonder if I've really learned anything more, or whether there's just that much more out there.
I forget who made this analogy, but as the light of your flashlight grows, the dark circle that surrounds it grows even bigger. And so bigger, more light you have, more information you have, the more questions you're aware of, more areas you know that you don't know.
It makes a lot of sense, yeah.
So you've been studying First Timothy, and upon my first couple of read-throughs again, I've been seeing that there's a strong connection between the letter of First Timothy and the things that we need to be doing as church, as we have been getting back together now, as we've come back in greater numbers. Church has been one of those things that we've had to really focus on what is important, what actually defines the church. Is it just Sunday morning services? Because if it is, then we lost that for almost 2 years. And now we're coming back together, and chances are, if the statistics in the States translate to Canada, chances are 80% of people will return to church. And so I think it's a bit of figuring out, how do we do this again, and what do we focus on as the most important things to start doing immediately, or and so First Timothy has some really strong, I would say some really strong words for how the church is supposed to act amongst themselves, and what benefit that is for the people if we participate in that sort of church. Before we started recording, you mentioned that you felt like you haven't studied First Timothy very often. Do you want to expand on what led you to First Timothy?
That's a really good question. I guess it was just that, I've done a fair bit of study in the Gospels and in, some of other books, and that pastoral ones just, I realized there was a lot that I wasn't familiar with, and I guess it was just an interest in reading a book that I wasn't that familiar with. And I think that was probably just one of the main reasons, I would say.
Well, I think the Holy Spirit has led you to something that is very vital to the church currently, and specifically in our circumstance here in Manitoba. Why do you believe that the message of First Timothy, the guidelines that Paul gives for different people, different Christians in the church, why do you believe that is crucial for the church to understand?
Well,
and that's
a
broad question, sorry.
Yeah, it is a broad question, but I did kind of find a couple of things, that kind of struck to me is, one of the importances of church is as community. And I'm not sure that we as the church today, how well we're really doing with that, and so I'm thinking that's important, that we can go back to Timothy, and going, hey, this is very relevant to us today to understand what this means, and that there's different roles for each of us, I've kind of seen that, I'm not sure how many other people, but if I look at the CMC background, even before I really started attending, there was a tendency of kind of like a hierarchy, where the bishop was on top, he performed all of the the baptisms, the communion services, everything. And he went down around to the different churches, and it seemed like people kind of like just relied on him, like he's going to do it all. I don't have to. Um, and I think we have to understand that and I think that we've changed that a lot today, which was beneficial, is that the role of leadership is a role, it's their place in there. And the rest of us, we also have a role. We don't just let leadership do everything. As a community, we've all got a part to play in that. And I think that that's something that we really do need to understand. And maybe you just, like understanding, what our role really is. Another thing that I found in this thing is just how, and I see this throughout First Timothy too, warning us of how easily it is to fall into sin. That if we're not careful, if we're not paying attention to what our place is in the community, we can easily fall away. And I think we've seen that, quite often within churches when you see the rise of divorce among Christians, like how prominent it is. And maybe there's very good reason for that, but I don't know. I still think that there's something important within marriage, that we don't want that divorce. And what about in leadership? We're seeing examples of a Ravi Zacharias, an incredible man who did a lot of wonderful things, and yet he hid a secret, that somehow remained hidden, and why did that happen? And even now another came when with the Hillsong Church, is that, yeah. With also, that same type of thing. Like, I don't know exactly, I didn't look into that as carefully, but also, this controversy that exists, and I'm kind of looking at why are these things happening? Is it because, we're not uplifting each other, and helping each other out in the roles that we're doing?
Yeah, that is the thing that struck me, that I don't think I've ever really seen in First Timothy before, but there is an expectation that the people will keep the leaders accountable.
Mm-hmm.
And with all the mega churches and all the big churches, that just seems to be out of the question. Brittany and I were listening to a podcast, The Rise and Fall of Mars Hill, and it's a few episodes in, and it's just fascinating, the mentality of Mark Driscoll's leadership. Even though I think I agree with a lot of teachings that he has, when he speaks about leadership, it's like you're either on the bus or you're getting run over by the bus, and that doesn't leave the door open for the people on the bus to hold the driver accountable. It's just this one person that says, I'm the driver. You either sit down, get on board, do something useful, or we'll throw you out and drive you over. Like that mentality is just, it doesn't leave room for accountability. And I think accountability is the price that we as the church pay to have the benefits of being church. I've been thinking about this for the past 8 months, about how the church has an opportunity to never let its members go hungry, lonely, or without a place to sleep. Like, the church should provide all the needs for the people within the church, but that at the cost is then you have to be willing to let that church prune things in your life and correct things in your life. And that goes for the leaders, that goes from the top down to the bottom up. It goes both ways.
I would see that as the one advantage of our more modern societies. I think we're allowing that more of, like in leadership, I've seen in the past where it can be a very lonely position, where they feel kind of alone, is there anyone kind of helping them out? Is there anyone really holding them accountable, in the same way as other people, are they really getting any kind of of an opportunity to allow themselves to be, um, held accountable to and helped out, in that same way. And I think that's one thing I'm seeing in our modern is that we're understanding, more of these things. We're saying that, mental counseling is good, or spiritual counseling, all of those types of things. I think we're more open to that, which I think is a benefit, but which should really be part of the church to begin with, as a community, that we're part of a family, that we're there to help one another out, no matter what position you have.
Yeah, yeah, and if we would have that understanding, then accountability isn't scary. If we think that somebody's trying to just knock us down and cut us down, then accountability is a weapon. But if we can understand that we are working together and we are the family of God, and this isn't to hurt you, this is to help you.
Yeah.
And
I see that in First Timothy, I know it's jumping ahead, but I think it's in chapter 6 where it talks about we need to do it without favoritism, without any, where was that? I should see if I can bring it up here. Oh, is it maybe chapter 5, verse 21? I think I have that noted here.
Yeah.
Not taking sides or showing favoritism is the version that I have here, the words that it uses. We need to be careful that, we're not being kind of prejudiced or biased in any way, when we're trying to help someone do it through a difficult situation.
Yeah, exactly. I think that Paul's instruction to Timothy really does lean towards that. Like, don't try to take a side. Try to practice holiness. Try to pursue righteousness. But as you're doing that, encourage the body to take care of each other.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't want to avoid the tough parts of this book, and I'd say that chapter 2 has the most challenging things for modern churches. Anyways, chapter 2, verse 9 to 15.
Mm-hmm.
How do you handle that passage?
That's a very good question, because, I can definitely understand, the tendency of women to be feeling inferior in this thing. And I don't think that that's really what it's saying here at all. I think it's, again, talking about different roles that we have. And the one thing that I saw is very positive is that encourages women to study. We're not just being set aside, told not to be really involved in the church. We are encouraged to, the women are encouraged to study and learn as well. I'm not sure, maybe I should actually start more from, verse 9, and then we could go into that part. It says in verse 9, and I want women to be modest in their appearance. They should wear decent and appropriate clothing and not draw attention to themselves by the way of hair, the way they fix their hair or anything like that. For women who claim to be devoted to God should make themselves attractive by the good things they do. And I think that that's, very important as well. Kind of when I read this story, it reminds me of an experience that I had visiting with friends in Hawaii. We went to this one place called the Polynesian Culture Center. And what was really interesting there is that we met up with, or we didn't meet them, personally, but it turned out that the Prince of Tonga, I think it is the name of the country. It's a small island, Polynesian island that still has a monarchy. And so this prince was there, and he was there with his daughter. And I found it interesting that this is a fairly nice day. You're in kind of like a tropical type of place, but she's wearing a tailored suit, like a jacket and skirt, like very modest, very, and I'm kind of thinking that as a royal princess, she's seeing that she's got a position that she needs to take of how she looks to people around us. And I kind of see that in our Christian walk too. We have, because of who we are in Christ, I think we have an obligation to be careful about how we appear to others, and so our Christianity or whatever, shouldn't be, or who we are shouldn't be based on what we're wearing, like it shouldn't draw that much attention. We should be appropriate, and I'm not sure that, how you dress though is that important to how we live. Again, I think the main thing is that we need to not make it an important part of who we are. And I'm sure if that's maybe I'm kind of jumping around a little bit there, but that's kind of what I see, is that we do need to be appropriate in how we look and our attitudes towards others, what we do, because we are children of God, and we need to be that representative. But, our attractiveness should look then more by the things we do for him, rather than how we look physically. So those would kind of be the things that I would say about, verses 9 to 10. And then in verse 11, where it says women should learn quietly and submissively, they should be allowed to study, on their own, kind of a thing. But then it says, I do not let women teach men or have authority over them. Let them listen quietly. And I found this interesting. I've been reading a commentary, and I'm not sure, how many people are familiar. It's called Paul for Everyone, the Pastoral Letters by N.T. Wright. And he put an interesting thing about, I think this goes more than beyond culture, but he made an interesting comment about there are signs in the letter, and I'll just read just a couple of paragraphs if that's all right. There are signs in the letter that it was originally sent to Timothy while he was in Ephesus. And one of the main things we know about religion in Ephesus is that the main religion, the biggest temple, the most famous shrine, was a female-only cult. The Temple of Artemis, that's her Greek name, the Romans call her Diana, was a massive structure which dominated the area. As befitted worshippers of a female deity, the priests were all women. They ruled the show and kept the men in their place. Now, if you were writing a letter to someone in a small, new religious movement with a base in Ephesus and wanted to say that because of the gospel of Jesus, the old ways of organizing male and female roles had to be rethought from top to bottom, with one feature of that being that the women were to be encouraged to study and learn and take a leadership role, you might as well want to avoid giving the wrong impression. Was the apostle saying that women should be trained up so that Christianity would gradually become a cult like that of Artemis, where women did the leading and kept the men in line? That, it seems to me, is what verse 12 is denying. And so I'm kind of seeing, that where Artemis, was a cult of, where women were in leadership and all of that, I think it's kind of showing that, no, that's not the way it's supposed to be. The men have an incredibly important role. And as it goes on to say, Adam was made first. I truly believe now, especially in my marriage, that my husband is the head of our household. He's kind of been made the person who's overall. That's his role. I don't have a problem with that at all. So I can put down those leadership roles to him. He still has that leadership role over me. What exactly it means when it says do not let women teach men or have authority over them, I think there's some very validity to that, in that the men are still the leadership, whatever other roles. I mean, we as women have all kinds of opportunities to teach. This is saying having the role over the male. We still have the opportunity, and it talks about that of widows, helping the younger widows out. It even talks about childbearing, women have an incredible position raising their children, There's all kinds of roles that they can do. And sometimes we forget about all of these wonderful roles, and we just look at that one, thing of what they can't do, maybe, And I think that what they can't do, we maybe limit them too much, in that I see that they can still do. I look at other verses in the Bible, how you connect those when it talks about that, some of the women were leaders in their church, and Paul encouraged that. That obviously meant that there was some kind of leadership. And Timothy itself, I find it interesting that when he talks about the role or the type of people that elders and deacons should be, in deacons it says, this is how the woman should be. Now, who's he talking about? It doesn't mention anything about what the women should be like as an elder. But as deacons, okay, if it's the deacon's wife, it obviously means she has a role as his wife to play in the deacon, or maybe it's even talking about women as actual deacons. And I think that was in, what verse was that?
In
Chapter 3,
3:11.
verse 11. Yeah, that would make, sense. So obviously women did have positions in the church. I don't think they were limited that much. I think this was just an opportunity to show that, women could easily take over, but that's not the way the church was meant to be, because of the position with Adam and Eve. Those are just some of my thoughts, um, I've also done, some other things where it seems totally legitimate that women could have, leadership roles like that. You mentioned about at one time, and we haven't really got into that yet, about gifts, in chapter 4, verse 14. What if women is given the gift of this? Well, maybe there's other ways that they can use it. Like I have felt that I have the gift of teaching, but there's a lot of ways that I can use that without being, the head leader in a church.
Yeah, and
maybe I've talked too much.
no, I think that was good. It's encouraging to hear, because I think that you've done good studying. I do find it interesting, like the argument is often made, and I tend to agree with it, that it's a surprise that in such a male-dominated world, if it is a male-dominated world, that Paul addresses the women whatsoever, and actually doesn't just address them as like with one verse, keep silent. He actually gives them instruction. That there is a role that Paul is laying out, and he actually expects that he can address women, and that there can be a position and a role in this church, in the community that he's speaking to. And I think that shows a high value of their ability to be vital parts of the body of Christ, not just an afterthought.
Mm-hmm. And they are an important part. It says, they have the ability to be saved, through Christ, just as well as any male, that there's equality in that aspect. We have the same position within Christ in that way, if you want to call it that way, say it that way.
I think where these kind of verses have been misused in conservative circles, in Christian conservative circles, I think they get used to hold women back and put women down and say, be quiet. But most of this is telling men, well, you have to step up, you have to be leaders. And I think a lot of men don't pursue those things with much fervor. They're content to let somebody else will lead. It does address women and does give them instruction, which I think is a unique thing to recognize. I don't think it's trying to discourage women. I think it's trying to encourage men to be leaders.
That's an excellent way of putting it. I think a lot of times I feel it seems like I've heard, like you mentioned, in those conservative churches, they choose those verses of what, role women should have, like not teaching, being, maybe put down a little bit. And they forget about that the men definitely have a role too. They talk about all of, like there's not just one type of person that they're talking about here. They're talking about men, they're talking about women, they're talking about, younger widows, older widows, elders, deacons, like all of these different people, you can find in First Timothy, and they all have a role to play, and they're all different.
Yeah. And you are referred to it, but chapter 4, verse 14, which using the literary context, these verses are speaking more directly to Timothy as an individual. But Paul says, do not neglect the spiritual gift within you, which was bestowed on you through prophetic utterances with laying on of hands by the elders, by the presbyter. And if scripture is inspired for us to learn from, then there's an expectation that there are gifts in our leaders, and there are gifts in people that aren't yet leading,
Mm-hmm.
and we have to pay attention to those. And even I do agree that verse 11 of chapter 3, that doesn't sound like wives of deacons. It sounds like with female deacons.
That's the way I would read it too. Like the one issue in Greek is that I believe it's the same word, whether it's wife or woman. So you'll find different translations, different commentaries will, look at it both ways. And that's why I mentioned both wives and women deacons.
Yeah.
That it could possibly refer, but I do see it more as being like a woman who's doing the role of a deacon.
Yeah.
That this is the type of late woman that she should be, which is, what does it say in 11? They must be respected and must not slander others. They must exercise self-control and be faithful in everything they do. And it's specifically, this version says their wives, but if you say women, and it's right in the middle of the description about what a deacon should be. So I definitely see that it could be, a deacon who was like a deaconess, so like a woman at that time.
I don't have the Greek in front of me, and even if I did, my Greek's only good enough to get me in trouble.
Yeah, well, my Greek's not that good either. It's just things that I've come across, knowing that a lot of times translations are hard because Greek words can mean two different things and can also be translated in English in different ways. So that sometimes makes it difficult. And like you say, that's where the study comes in. Understanding the context and everything of where it's situated.
Yeah. It seems chapter 4 seems to have strong words for the importance of the church taking care of its own. It also has high standards as to who is worthy of that care. How important do you think Paul's charge to the church to take care of each other is?
Well, I definitely see that important. When you look when the church started in Acts, they met together regularly, taking care of one another. Those who had money would often give to help those who didn't. And sharing a lot of things, and even like in some of the communion passages where it says, and then there's people that are racing ahead and eating everything and not letting those others participate and stuff like that, and that's not right either. So there's definitely that thing about helping each other as a family and participating together as a family. And later on he talks about, or is that the one where he talks about the widows in the church, that he encourages, if the widow has a family, that they take care of her, but if she doesn't, the church needs to take care of her. There's no question about that, at least in my mind, that they're saying this woman has no family, like she's kind of on her own, she needs help, we need to help her. And even with older men helping out the younger people, like consider them as brothers and sisters, and treat them like a mother or a father if they're older, like that type of thing. I think that's all kind of in chapter 4, isn't it?
Yeah, sorry, it's chapter 5.
Oh, is it chapter 5? Oh, yeah, that's right. Chapter 4 is about warning against false teachers and people who are, you know, maybe directing them away from where they should be going.
Yeah, like you said, the way that Paul describes widows and their role in the church seems very much like a caring for one another, putting each other first mentality.
Yeah.
And
what's interesting, when you mention the widow, we're supposed to take care of the widow, but she's also got kind of a role that she can play as praying for the church, So, it's kind of showing that she's still very, much of a part, an important part of the church body.
yeah. Now she who is a widow indeed, and who has been left alone, has fixed her hope on God and continues in entreats and prayers night and day. entreaties and prayers night and day. But she who gives herself to wanton pleasure is dead even while she lives. That role of fixing her hope on God, she almost has the role of being the reminder that in the wilderness we are closer to God. When there's no one else you can rely on, when you can't earn that paycheck anymore, when you don't have kids that will take care of you anymore, or your husband is gone, like being a widow, especially in first century Rome,
Mm-hmm.
that was a very dangerous and destitute place to be. And so it's interesting that the job isn't be savvy and save and make sure that when you become a widow you're secure. The job is be secure in the Lord. Put your trust in God. It's fascinating that that's the instruction. How do you think the church is doing with the whole caring for each other?
I think there's a lot that we can still work on, I'm not sure. I feel we've come a long ways, if I think about when, if we're talking, say, particularly about, like, I'm going to, it's probably the church in general, but because I'm more familiar with the CMC at this point, if I kind of look at them and how we've grown, I see a tremendous like improvement or a growth, might be a better way of doing it. I can remember years ago, people coming into our church and not feeling very welcome at all, and so they wouldn't stay. And I think that's changed a lot. I think through some of our difficulties and our growth and our maybe, looking into a, a growth in our understanding of scripture even, I think we're catching on to that, I still think that I don't know if we'll never be perfect, let's put it that way, because on earth we're still human, we still sin, we still make mistakes, but I've seen a lot of growth in that. I know that, and I'm sure others have too, is this time at CMC has really worked at trying to become more of a community church, of looking out for one another, and not even just one another, but people in the community around them, hoping that if they're in trouble, they're welcome to become part of our community, kind of thing. So I do see that. And yet I think there's still a lot of growth that could be done in that area.
Yeah, I agree. I've been encouraged by the emphasis in the past 2 or 3 years in that I've seen in the Steinbach CMC, that emphasis on let's love each other. The Bible doesn't say we'll be known by how much we've saved for retirement, or
Mm-hmm.
or even the Bible doesn't even say you'll be known by how much you give to charity, or you'll be known by how much you do for everyone else. You'll be known because you love each other. And
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that, and when, we're talking kind of like about, money and retirement, if we go into chapter 6, like I find it interesting that when he talks about money and stuff like that, where was that? About what he's encouraging Timothy to teach. Oh, teach those who are rich in this world not to be proud and not to trust in their money, which is unreliable. It's important to also have good works, being rich in good works, being generous to those in need, sharing with others. And I don't know if that always means wealth, like, because he also talks about how a wealth can be just, is it verse 6, I think, true godliness with contentment is in itself great wealth. Our wealth comes from that, just being content in who we are and what we're doing with each other, and helping one another out. I see that, when you look at the whole context of chapter 6, that's kind of what I'm seeing, that our wealth comes in from doing good things and being content with what we have.
Yeah, I think that Paul's expectation that if you are doing good things, that is a far greater wealth than money or possessions.
Exactly.
If
That's what I'm trying to,
yeah,
that's what I'm seeing, like, I don't know if he exactly puts it in those specific words, but that's what I'm definitely seeing.
right, like especially like verse 17 to 18, uh, instruct those who are rich in this present world, so that's wealth and possessions, not to be conceited or to fix their hope on the uncertainty of riches, but on God, who richly supplies us with all things to, to enjoy. Instruct them to do good, to be rich in good works, to be generous and ready to share, storing up for themselves the treasure of a good foundation of the future, so that they may take hold of that which is life indeed. We often think when we have a good job or have built a business for ourselves, we think that that's ours. At least
Mm-hmm.
I think like, well, I've worked hard for this paycheck and I'm finally getting the rewards. I can live more comfortably. I can finally live like how I want to. But Paul's encouraging those people, you have this position because God has put things in place for you. Like the reality is, a lot of us who get good jobs, even all of us who live in Canada, in Manitoba, we are privileged to have been born here. So are we willing to share that privilege with our brothers and sisters in the global church or even in our individual churches? Are we ready to share the, even if we have worked hard? Like, I'm not trying to diminish that people that have good jobs and have built businesses haven't worked hard. I think that they have. But if you're part of the church, God has a role for you as well.
Right.
And like you said, like there's an opportunity for you to be the generous one ready to share.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what I struggle with is I look at somebody who has that ability to share their wealth, and if they are really generous, which a lot of people are, it, it almost takes out the ability to challenge them on something, because in my mind, and this is my own flaw maybe, in my mind I look, well, they're sharing their wealth. That's the hardest thing to do. They're being generous.
And I'm not sure if this is kind of what you're alluding to, but I kind of see that is that what is the purpose of being generous? Is it just that, like, I just feel I have this obligation to share, or is it truly because I want to help others? Like, I want to show the love of God to others through, and this is my way that I can maybe show that a little bit. Like I guess I'm looking at the attitude of why is this person sharing that wealth. That maybe that's what we need to look at a little bit as well. I'm not sure if that's kind of like what you're meaning a little bit by that, of how we can encourage them, in if they're already doing this.
Right. Yeah, that is what I'm alluding to or getting at a little bit, is how how do you hold somebody who's already being generous to accountability? How do you continue to encourage them to grow? Because it's it's tempting to treat the church like a business, like, well, they're the biggest contributor to
Mm-hmm.
this business, to our functioning. We You don't question them, you don't bite the hand that feeds you, so to speak, but ultimately God provides for his people. God grows the church. The Lord is the hand that feeds us, not this one person.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of what you're saying is, I actually did kind of like a book report one time on a it was by an author named Justo Gonzalez. He does a lot of work on history of the Christian church. and he had one about faith and wealth in the early church. And I thought there was a lot of things that I could learn, like take from that could, you know, represent us here now in the modern too. And one thing that he kind of alluded to there quite a bit is that the one sin of wealth, if you would call it that, is if you're using your wealth for self-sufficiency. I don't need anyone, I can buy whatever I need, so I don't need to help from anyone or anything like that. It kind of almost cuts you off a little bit from relationship with others who could be helping you, or who you could be helping them personally, and so even if they're generous, if they're cutting themselves off totally from what they're giving the money to, is that really helpful? And is that what we can encourage as well?
Yeah, I think.
Yeah, it can do dangerous things to us if we let it. I think we can also use it very much for good, but because of the power of money, I think we really have to be careful, with that.
Like, are we putting our security in God and focusing on God? Like it says, encourage those who are wealthy in this world, focus on the Lord, not on the money. Remember where your security is.
That's a very good point. I think that that would be very representative of what Paul is telling Timothy in these verses.
I'm not sure if I can find the verse, but God refers to the wilderness as, like, that was when you relied on me.
Mm-hmm.
This pandemic was a bit of a forced wilderness for a lot of people. This is uncomfortable. This isn't what I like. And it's similar with finances. When there's a tangible thing, it's easier to trust the tangible, physical element.
Yeah, I think that's typical of who we are as humans. We tend to trust in those things more than a faith, in God, who's given us so much, but that maybe we don't always recognize.